I woke up on my 18th birthday expecting maybe a small cake or a quick happy birthday. Instead, I found my adoptive father in the living room with a suitcase at his feet. My heart pounded. Something felt off. He didn't offer a hug or a smile. He didn't say much at all. He just handed me a duffel bag stuffed with a few clothes and tossed a release form onto the coffee table. "We did our part," he said flatly. "You're not our responsibility anymore." I stared at him in disbelief. My adoptive mother stood behind him, arms crossed, avoiding my eyes. I felt an ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. 18, kicked out, just like that. My father leaned forward as if he was doing me a favor. "Sign the release, take your stuff, we're done." No apology, no explanation. I nodded quietly. What else could I do? I grabbed a pen, my hands shaking, and signed my name. They thought I had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. But they were wrong. 2 months earlier, I'd found an old letter hidden in the attic. It told a story they didn't think I would ever discover. The night before, I had slipped the key from my father's office drawer into my pocket. I still remember the day I found it, a yellowed envelope stuck behind a dusty trunk. At first, I thought it was some old Christmas card. Then I read the name on the front. Tara Bellamy. It was my name, but not the name I'd grown up with. My adoptive parents always called me Tara Foster. Strange, right? Inside, I found a scanned copy of a will and a short note. "My granddaughter, Tara Bellamy, is hereby named beneficiary of the Bellamy Trust. Signed, Richard Bellamy." Richard Bellamy, my biological grandfather. The letter explained how he set up a trust for me through my father's line. My father, Henry Bellamy, had died from cancer when I was too young to remember him. My grandfather passed away 2 years after that. But he'd left something for me. Something big, apparently. I felt my hands shake reading the words. Why had I never heard about this? How come my last name was different? The letter was clear. The trust belonged to me. By blood. Suddenly, every cold glance from my adoptive parents felt suspicious. I realized I might be standing on the edge of a huge secret. The letter mentioned a trustee, appointed to protect these funds. Until I turned 18. Right before leaving that house forever, I used the key I'd stolen to unlock my adoptive father's desk drawer. My heart thumped. If he caught me, who knows what he'd do. But something pushed me forward. I had to know what they were hiding. Inside, I found more than just receipts and bills. I discovered official-looking paperwork about my guardianship and a copy of the trust documents. Except these looked altered. Pages had new clauses added. One section jumped out, a caregiver discretion clause. It allowed my guardians to use the trust for living costs while raising me. I swallowed hard. That clause was stamped with a notary seal, dated 4 years after my grandfather had died. That was impossible. My breathing quickened as I flipped through each page. The signature seemed smooth, too perfect, as if the pen never lifted from the paper. Even the notary stamp looked suspicious. What did this all mean? My adoptive parents had apparently dipped into funds they shouldn't have touched. And if they forged these documents, they had broken the law. I crammed everything into my backpack, realizing I was holding proof of something bigger than I had ever imagined. I went straight to the address listed on the original will. A small law firm in a tall, gray building downtown. My palms were sweating as I explained who I was and showed the paralegal the letter mentioning the Bellamy Trust. She took one look at the original documents and her eyes went wide. "You're Tara Bellamy?" she asked, her voice full of surprise. She quickly pulled up old files on her computer. Her expression darkened. "That trust," she whispered, "should have been locked away until you turned 18. She explained that I was never fully adopted. On record, I was registered only as a ward, meaning my guardians had limited rights. I felt my throat tighten. If that was true, how did they manage to access a trust that was supposed to be untouchable? She turned her screen toward me, showing a digital record of an adoption that apparently never finalized. Then she showed me a second document, an adoption certificate dated a year later, but the names and dates didn't match my birth certificate. It was like I was someone else on paper. My mind swirled. If I wasn't legally adopted, how did they get their hands on my inheritance? The paralegal directed me to a name I'd seen on the original will. Howard Latham, the lawyer appointed by my grandfather as the trustee. With a few phone calls, I tracked him down at a small suburban house, His yard was overgrown, and a battered old mailbox read Latham in peeling letters. He opened the door and blinked in shock when I introduced myself. "Tara Bellamy?" he repeated. "That's not possible." We sat in his living room, surrounded by dusty books and old newspaper clippings. His hands shook as he flipped through the letter and will I'd brought. He kept shaking his head. "I resigned from your grandfather's estate after they sent me a death certificate with your name. They said you'd passed away when you were 6. A cold chill ran through me. "They told you I died?" He showed me the paper. It had my name, birth date, and a declared date of death. My adoptive parents must have faked the certificate. Howard looked heartbroken. I believed it. I thought the trust would just dissolve. "I'm so sorry." Holding my own death certificate in my hands, I realized how deep this deception really went. Howard helped me confirm what I already suspected. My adoptive parents had staged my death on paper. That false certificate had cleared the way for them to argue the trust was no longer active. But that wasn't all. We dug through old estate statements. The trust money was quietly transferred to something called Bellamy Family Management, LLC. Strange name, right? But it was just a shell company, a fake business used to reroute funds. According to Howard, the money would be reabsorbed for family purposes once I was declared dead. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. My adoptive parents had manipulated the system for years. They must have realized that if I died, legally or otherwise, the inheritance would revert to them, or at least be accessible through some shady channel. Howard stared at me with sad eyes. "I wish I'd known. I only found out they changed everything after they told me you were gone. I retired soon after." His regret was genuine. I realized he'd been pushed out to remove any witness who might question the paperwork. As we scanned the files, I saw a name that made my blood run cold. My adoptive dad's name, listed as a manager of that shell company. Back in my tiny motel room, I spread out everything I'd collected. I compared signatures from the trust amendments to random documents my adoptive mother had signed over the years. Like a birthday card she gave me once, though it was barely heartfelt. The swirls, the loops, the way she dotted her I's, they matched. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. It wasn't some rogue lawyer forging things, it was my own adoptive mother, penning her name as if she were the trustee or my grandfather. She'd committed forgery under official notary stamps. What else had she done? I called Howard and told him. He went quiet for a moment before speaking. "That means everything they submitted is fraudulent. If you take this evidence to a judge, it could collapse their entire scheme." My heart pounded. This was the key that could bring them down. All that time they smiled at me, pretending we were one happy family. They were secretly draining my inheritance. And now I had proof. Howard's voice trembled with resolve. "I'll stand with you. I'll testify. We can reopen the case." Howard helped me use his old estate lawyer credentials to access an archived account tied to the Bellamy Trust. We logged in on a secure computer. My heart raced as page after page of disbursements appeared. For years, money poured out of the trust into various accounts labeled household support and childcare costs. It was all under the guise of caring for me. Vacations I never went on, spa trips for my adoptive parents, fancy restaurant bills, mortgage payments, a new car, every line item pointed to a betrayal. They'd used my money to fund their lifestyle, even sending their biological son to a private academy. Meanwhile, I got secondhand clothes and an allowance so small I had to beg for lunch money. Then I saw a recent transaction from 2 months ago, a huge lump sum wired to a Cayman Islands account. The beneficiary? A holding company I didn't recognize. My blood boiled. They were shipping my inheritance offshore, maybe to hide it. Howard looked grim. "They might be trying to vanish it before you turn 18. But they hadn't counted on one thing. I was still alive, and I had the truth on my side. I printed every record and realized this might be my last chance to act. I filed a motion to unseal the guardianship records, the ones that granted my adoptive parents legal oversight of me. My lawyer, a sharp litigator named Carla, warned me it might be a slow process, but shockingly, the judge approved it fast. The guardianship was from years ago, and no one had opposed opening it up. Inside those files, I found a twisted narrative. There was a psychiatric report claiming my biological mother was unstable, manic, and abusive. It stated that I was safer in foster care or guardianship. That document had helped my adoptive parents gain control of me, but the signature at the bottom? A doctor who later lost his license for fraud and overdiagnosis. Carla looked at me, eyebrows raised. They used a known fraudster to get custody. This is huge. I nodded, feeling a mix of anger and relief. Every lie was piling up. Every piece of evidence pointed to a careful plan. Discredit my real family, fake my death, drain the trust. I turned the page and found a note. Maddox family custody request denied. No further contact. What really happened to my biological mother? Buried in the newly unsealed records was a single sheet of paper that made my hands tremble. An original birth certificate. There I was, listed as Tara Bellamy, daughter of Henry Bellamy and Lauren Maddox. Under father's place of birth, I saw the stamp for a city I'd never even heard of. This was the missing piece. All my life, I thought my name was simply Tara Foster. My adoptive parents never mentioned a different last name. No wonder. If I'd known who I really was, I might have uncovered the trust sooner. At the bottom of the file was a note. Custody challenged by Maddox family, denied due to maternal abandonment. But was it really abandonment? My mother was labeled unstable. Everything about this smelled like a frame job. My gut churned thinking about how easily the courts were misled by my adoptive parents' false documents. I closed the file and saw one more line. Biological mother's request for hearing denied. She never had a chance to fight for me. Howard helped me. I hired a private investigator named Julian. He specialized in old legal disputes and knew how to track down people who vanished in official records. It took him a week of phone calls and database searches before he finally called me. "You need to see this," he said, sounding tense. We met at a coffee shop. He handed me a manila folder that felt too light to contain such heavy news. "Your mother, Lauren Maddox, filed for custody when you were 6 months old," he explained. "She showed up to court, but they never let her testify. The judge denied her request outright." My pulse pounded. "So she didn't abandon me?" He shook his head. "No, she tried to get you back. Then a few weeks after that hearing, she disappeared from the public record. No tax returns, no job listings, nothing." He paused. "But I found an old hospital intake form. She was checked in under a different name." Why would she change her name? Fear? Threats? My heart twisted imagining the lengths my mother went to in order to protect me or find me. The hospital's location was upstate. I decided right then and there. I had to go. The drive felt endless, winding through quiet roads and dense trees. My hands gripped the steering wheel. I tried not to imagine the worst. Julian had discovered that my mother, under an alias, was admitted for an accidental overdose. But was it really accidental? I arrived at the hospital's record archives, my nerves buzzing. The clerk was kind but cautious about releasing any information. Luckily, I had a letter from Howard explaining our legal reasons. After some hesitation, she led me to a back room of file cabinets. We found the documents in a thick folder. My mother was described as confused and distraught, claiming someone took her baby. She insisted that the official story about me dying was a lie. The doctors wrote that she experienced extreme stress and possible paranoia. Then she was transferred to a psychiatric facility upstate. Tears stung my eyes. She hadn't forgotten me or abandoned me. She'd been trapped in her own nightmare, labeled unstable because she wouldn't stop saying I was still alive. I stepped out of the hospital, the name of that psychiatric facility on a slip of paper in my hand. It was still open. The psychiatric center had tall fences and faded walls. My stomach felt twisted as I walked to the reception desk. I gave them my mother's name, the old alias she used, plus her real name. The nurse looked surprised but went to check. 10 minutes later, she came back, nodding slowly. She led me to a small visitor's room with plain chairs and fluorescent lights. My heart hammered. Then the door opened, and in walked a woman with tired eyes and streaks of gray in her hair. She looked wary, but the moment she saw me, her expression changed. She whispered, "Tara?" like she was afraid to speak too loudly. How she recognized me, I had no idea. Maybe she just felt it. Tears welled up in my eyes. I'd never seen her face, but somehow, she felt familiar. We talked in hushed voices. She told me how she never believed the paper saying I had died. "I fought, but they called me insane," she said, voice trembling. "I told them you were alive, but no one believed me." She'd been trapped here for years, treated like she was delusional. Then she handed me something. A small envelope with my father's handwriting, proof that none of this was just in her head. I took my mother's envelope straight to Howard's place. He welcomed me in, setting his old reading glasses on the tip of his nose as he carefully read the handwritten letter from my father. Then he showed me something he'd kept in a safe, a sealed file from my grandfather, Richard Bellamy. This file was meant as a last resort if something went wrong, Howard explained, hands shaking as he lifted the seal. Inside was a backup copy of the trust documents. My grandfather had included a special clause. If I was ever illegally declared dead or there was suspicion of fraud, the trust could be reactivated once I turned 18, provided I could prove I was alive. The file also contained letters from my grandfather, cautioning about possible interference by outsiders who might want the money. He never named my adoptive parents directly, but it was obvious he feared someone would exploit the system. The problem was time. According to the clause, I had 30 days from my 18th birthday to reactivate the trust. I checked the calendar. I only had 10 days left. I realized that if I didn't act now, they'd get away with everything. Early the next morning, Carla helped me file an emergency petition in probate court, presenting all the evidence, the original documents, Howard's affidavit, my birth certificate, and even the letter from my father. The clerk looked stunned by the stack of proof. She whispered, "Good luck," as she handed me the stamped copies. Now it was a waiting game. Would the judge see through the lies? We had only 10 days, and these cases can drag on for weeks or even months. But Carla knew how to push for priority hearings. The story was too big and too outrageous to ignore. Sure enough, a day later we got a court date. My adoptive parents must have caught wind because that same afternoon, they filed a parental compensation claim, insisting they were owed money for raising me. I almost laughed at the irony, given they used my own trust to do it. Carla remained calm. It's a stalling tactic. They're hoping to muddy the waters. I clenched my fists. They were used to controlling the narrative, but for once, they couldn't stop me from speaking. The hearing was set for next week, just before my 30-day window closed. In the courtroom, tension filled the air. On one side sat my adoptive parents, armed with binders of receipts and documents, trying to justify every penny. Their lawyer painted a picture of struggling guardians who sacrificed to raise me. My parents nodded solemnly, like they were saints doing charity work. But then Carla presented our evidence. Copies of bank statements showing the trust paid for their mortgage, their cars, and their endless vacations. The judge's stern gaze darted from those papers to my adoptive parents. I kept my eyes down, focusing on my breathing. My mother, adoptive mother, I reminded myself, glanced at me with a flicker of panic. She must have realized we had the upper hand. Every argument they made crashed against proof of forgery, false death certificates, and illegally modified trust documents. When the judge asked them to explain these forged notary stamps, their lawyer stammered. My adoptive father's face turned red. We were advised it was a standard amendment," he lied. But the judge didn't look convinced. The judge ordered a full audit of the trust. Next hearing was in 3 days. We could all sense the tide was turning. 3 days later, we were back in court. This time, the mood was even heavier. The court-appointed auditor took the stand. She calmly explained how she'd traced every forged signature and questionable transaction. Then she read her findings. My adoptive parents had committed systematic fraud, forging documents to access a trust they had no right to control. The judge's face hardened. He declared their guardianship null and void from the moment they used false statements to gain custody. Legally, it was as if they'd never had the right to my finances at all. My adoptive parents stared in horror. Their lawyer tried to object, but the judge slammed down the gavel. "This court recognizes Tara Bellamy as the sole and rightful heir to the Bellamy Trust," the judge said firmly. My chest tightened. All these years, stolen from me. Yet in that moment, I finally felt recognized for who I was. As the judge signed the order, he glanced at my adoptive parents. "These findings may be forwarded for criminal investigation," he warned. Their eyes went wide with fear. The official paperwork arrived 2 days later. Carla handed me the documents, which formally reinstated the trust in my name. After so long, I now had access to the Bellamy inheritance, enough money to change my life. Yet I didn't feel like celebrating. It wasn't about living large or bragging on social media. It was about justice and closure. I stood outside the courthouse, holding the files that proved my entire childhood was a lie. My phone buzzed. I looked down to see a text from my adoptive mother. "We need to talk. Please, hear us out." I read it twice. Part of me wanted to ignore her forever. Another part of me felt a sudden curiosity. What could they possibly say now? Howard placed a hand on my shoulder. "Sometimes it's worth hearing the final excuses," he offered quietly. I nodded, torn between anger and pity. They were the only parents I'd known, even if they'd been criminals in disguise. Swallowing my pride, I texted back a single word: tomorrow. We agreed to meet at a small diner outside town, neutral territory. When I arrived, they were already there, hunched in a corner booth. They looked older, drawn, and scared. My adoptive father started to talk, words spilling out. We never meant to hurt you. We needed the money to care for you." My adoptive mother grabbed my hand. I pulled away. "You forged documents. You told the courts I died. You called me a burden." My voice shook with quiet rage. They glanced at each other, desperation in their eyes. My father muttered, "We didn't realize how much the trust was worth at first. Then we got used to it." He tried to sound apologetic. "But we did raise you, right?" My entire body trembled. They were making it sound like they had no choice, as if draining my inheritance was some necessary evil. "You had 18 years to love me," I said softly. "You chose the money." They begged me to drop the charges, claiming they'd pay me back or work something out. I slipped an envelope onto the table. Inside were copies of the court's criminal referral. I stood up, looking them in the eye. "We're done here." That weekend, I drove to my grandfather's old estate. It was a sprawling property with a gate and a long driveway. Vines crept along the walls and the paint chipped in places. Dust coated the windows. My footsteps echoed in empty corridors that once belonged to the Bellamy family. My family. I wandered from room to room, imagining the life I could have had. Maybe I would have played in these hallways as a kid. Maybe my parents and grandparents would have celebrated my birthdays here. Instead, I spent my childhood under the roof of people who only saw me as a paycheck. The silent rooms felt haunted by what-ifs. Part of me wanted to fix the place up, transform it into something warm and welcoming. Another part of me just wanted to leave this relic behind. Memories I never got to form couldn't be reclaimed. Eventually, I locked the front door and stood on the porch, gazing at the overgrown yard. The wind rustled the trees as if whispering a final goodbye. Maybe one day I'd restore it. But not now. I dropped the key in my bag and turned away, determined to reclaim my future on my own terms. Once the inheritance was officially in my name, I changed my last name back to Bellamy. It felt like shedding a heavy coat I'd been forced to wear all my life. The name Foster reminded me too much of those empty smiles and stolen money. I rented a quiet apartment in a safe neighborhood. The first thing I did was bring my biological mother there. After proving her false diagnosis in court, she was finally released from the psychiatric facility. The staff said her progress soared the moment she saw me again. We didn't need fancy cars or a big mansion. We just needed peace. I spent my days carefully planning how to manage the trust, but I also spent my nights talking to Mom about everything. The guilt and sadness she carried melted a bit every time I reassured her, "I'm alive, and I'm okay." People asked why I didn't plaster this on social media or go public with the story. But I'd had enough drama. I just wanted to focus on healing. My new life was about quietly moving forward. As we settled in, I received a final envelope, postmarked years ago, with my name in neat handwriting. The envelope contained a letter from my father, written when he was in the hospital for cancer treatments. The date on the top corner told me it was from before I turned 2. My eyes blurred with tears as I began to read. "My dearest Tara, I wish I could watch you grow up. I wish I could protect you from everything that might harm you. Your grandfather promised me he'd look after you, no matter what. Always remember our family name. You are a Bellamy, and that means something. It means strength, resilience, and love." I could almost hear his voice through those pages. At the end, he wrote, "I know who you'll become. If life ever seems too heavy, remember we believe in you." A small photograph fluttered out, a snapshot of him holding me as a baby. He looked so young, smiling like he had all the hope in the world. I clutched that photo against my heart, feeling closer to him than I ever had before. I slipped the letter into a safe place, tears streaking my cheeks, determined to honor his faith in me. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of legal news. The state moved forward with charges against my adoptive parents for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. Financial audits dug into their assets, draining what little they hadn't already spent. Their retirement accounts seized. Their lavish home likely on the line for restitution. I had to appear in a hearing to confirm the facts. My adoptive mother tried to appeal to my sympathy. She sobbed on the stand, blaming outside pressures and bad advice. But I just stared straight ahead. My father used to always tell me to hide my emotions, but I wasn't going to let them see me break. The judge's ruling was swift and severe. They owed the trust back interest and faced potential prison time if convicted. The IRS also launched its own investigation into their hidden accounts, including that Cayman Islands transfer. They were sinking faster than they could bail water. I stepped out of court, the press snapping pictures. I wondered what they'd do when they realized they couldn't hide behind lies anymore. In the final phase of the legal battle, my lawyers filed a motion to recoup guardian compensation from my adoptive parents. Essentially, they had billed the trust for raising me, but never used their own money. Now, the court demanded they repay those amounts personally. The argument was simple. If they spent my trust funds on my upbringing, they didn't actually pay for anything themselves. They stole from me, so now they owed me. When the judge granted that motion, my adoptive parents were left with a colossal debt they couldn't escape by bankruptcy, because fraud removes that protection. I heard they sold furniture, canceled every unnecessary expense, and borrowed from family members. Still, it wouldn't be enough. Their fancy cars and big house were illusions, funded by my money. I witnessed their car being repossessed right in the courthouse parking lot. My adoptive mother broke down crying. My father tried to fight the repo agent, screaming about an appeal that would never come. I walked away, knowing their time of living off my name was finally over. After all the verdicts and rulings, I finally felt a weight lift. My inheritance was secure. The trust was restored. Justice was served. The final step was letting go of the rage I'd carried. I used part of the trust to ensure my mother got the best care available, with proper therapy and support. She'd missed so many years of my life, but at least now, we had the future. I visited my father's grave for the first time. I left a white flower, tears slipping down my cheeks. Then I drove to my grandfather's resting place, silently thanking him for believing in me, enough to prepare for every trick my adoptive parents tried. Some people might expect me to be bitter, to chase revenge forever. But I'd done enough. They lost their freedom, their respect, and every cent they siphoned from me. They would live with those consequences. Meanwhile, I got what they could never take, the truth about who I was. Now when I catch my reflection in a mirror, I see Tara Bellamy, the real one. My name, my legacy, my blood. No longer a placeholder in someone else's plan.